the liberty movement. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts about what I see to be an identity crisis in the libertarian movement that began during COVID-19 and has kind of unfolded in the last couple of years. So this one is episode 241 of Vital Dissent. I'm your host, Patrick McFarlane. Show notes may be found at vitaldissent.com/241. So a bunch of personal thoughts. In this show, I've always been very open about my thoughts, my personal experience. And I think that's what people like about my show. And I hope that people like that about me. I'm not a perfect person. Of course, nobody is. And I like to share kind of the way that I've changed and my thoughts have changed on the show. And I have had episodes like that in the past. And to be honest, guys, it's been hard to put out content for a few reasons. There's like some personal news that I'll be sharing maybe in a month or two, but that has kind of been going on in the last month. But I've also been really busy with work. I had my first jury trial that was scheduled last Friday, just a few days ago, and I spent all week being in limbo, not knowing if it was going to go or not. And the DA filed a motion to adjourn, and it was granted. And I was number 2 on the trial list, but I really wanted it to go because it would have been a good experience for me. But I've really just been focusing on, my business in the last few weeks, but also family stuff and, traveling with Thanksgiving and all that. But another reason why I've been struggling to put out content is just because things are weird. Things are kind of weird in the movement. And I wanted to kind of expound upon that because when I first entered the movement, and part of that, this was back in 2016, even though I was a libertarian before then, but I wasn't really connected with the movement, and I was in like Young Americans for Liberty and stuff like that, but I wasn't in the online space. So when I discovered Tom Woods, became an Austro libertarian like a lot of different people, and decided to start a podcast because that's what at the time Tom Woods was encouraging everyone to start podcasts, and that kind of changed with along with a few things. But of course, I owe my presence in this space to Tom Woods, and he's the reason why I started doing this. And at that point in time, and maybe it was because I was naive and wasn't really experienced in like the longevity of the movement. I didn't have the broader snapshot. And maybe my feelings right now are because of that too. Maybe it's just not having the 20 or 30 year look back of what the movement has been and the fractures in the movement and what they have been. But when I joined the movement, everything really seemed unified, right? It seemed like we were all pulling in the same direction. And of course, I'm not talking about the broader liberty movement here. I'm talking more about like the Mises, Tom Woods orbit kind of thing. And when the Mises caucus came forward, it seemed like everybody was on board for the most part. All the big figures in the movement were pulling the rope in the same direction. It really seemed like, and there was all this energy that was behind the Mises caucus revolution. And with COVID-19 coming through, I think the cracks in the facade started to really show in terms of, of course, the Mises caucus and that movement itself was really strong and continues. Well, we'll talk about that too. But at least when COVID hit, all of a sudden, I think there were a lot of people in the movement that really went through an identity crisis because, of course, it was brought on by the ridiculous and scary time where it seemed like, where quite literally people were being forced out of their jobs for refusing a medical procedure. And people were really standing there wondering why libertarianism didn't help them and how libertarianism failed to prevent the totalitarian overreach from COVID-19. And then we saw the Summer of Love and all of the fiery but mostly peaceful protests and the wanton destruction of property across the United States. And we saw the Kyle Rittenhouse incident where there are still people today who believe that Kyle Rittenhouse killed 3 African Americans. And I think for a lot of people, and I've noticed that, I mean, the elephant in the room here, I'm talking about the post-libertarian moment. And I think for a lot of people who were very personally affected by COVID-19, I've noticed a common theme that people who were most seriously affected by COVID-19 tended to go in this post-libertarian direction. And I'm not an expert on, you know, exactly what they think. I haven't had them on because they seem to be mostly, um, I don't know, hating of like specifically like the Libertarian Institute crew. And there's a lot of kind of stupid Twitter drama that's gone along with that. But I'm not a post-libertarian, although do think that some points that they bring up are worthwhile to consider. And I have, this whole living in Ancapistan in your head idea. I think that's a valid critique, and I think that I've tried to think about it a lot and change the way that I think in my strategies, in my activism. But it hasn't made me abandon, this decision that I made in around COVID time to focus on foreign policy. And I think that a lot of that has to do with my relationship with Kyle Anzalone, and knowing him since I started doing this podcasting thing, seeing him do conflicts of interest, and Kyle really becoming a real, just a machine on foreign policy. And but this idea in it is all wrapped up in what exactly antiwar.com is and what the mission is. And so through that time, getting closer with the antiwar.com crew, Dave DeCamp and Kyle, and Connor doing stuff over at antiwar.com, and Will being in that orbit, but also getting to talk to Eric Garris, and being part of the Libertarian Institute with Scott Horton, and knowing what their mission is and what it has been since the 90s is to focus on foreign policy and the national security state, because Rothbard said that is the key to the whole libertarian business, is tackling that. And I'm going to be discussing, later in this episode, discussing a little more about what exactly antiwar.com is, and talking about the single issue coalition between the dissident left, the anti-war left, and the libertarian anti-war movement, antiwar.com, and the populist right, and the America Firsters on the right, and kind of talking strategy, because that really goes to a lot of the cracks that I'm seeing too. But to go chronologically and tell this story, just what I've noticed, the fracturing of the post-libertarian moment happening during COVID, and a big schism in the movement. And in some way there have been some element of like Mises Institute sentiment that has been post-libertarian, that I'm not saying that everyone at the Mises Institute is, but there's seems to be like a strain of thinking. And then it seems like you have your Hoppians too, who are another faction who are in that direction. I'm not saying that these are all the same people, but some of the thinking seems to be on that side. So you have people who I think are going more in a far right reactionary direction, who I would say would be the post-libertarians, some of the Hoppian crowd, and some strains of the Mises Institute thinking. And then you have the Mises Caucus stuff. And so that was the next thing that happened after COVID and the post-libertarian moment. And it seemed like there was a lot of criticism from the post-libertarians to the Mises Caucus. Basically the two camps being people who believe that libertarians should be Machiavellian, people who believe that libertarians should be Machiavellian and go through the Republican Party, and then people who think that there's a space for libertarianism with the Libertarian Party itself and the Mises Caucus stuff. So it really seemed, just from my perspective, that everyone in my alignment, because I wasn't a Mises Caucus person, but I was a fan of the Mises Caucus, and I don't mean to say was either. I am a fan of the Mises Caucus, and I appreciate, actually more largely, I appreciate everyone who is working towards the goal of liberty in the liberty movement. This isn't a video to call anyone out, because I think there's a space for everyone. And actually, this video is kind of lamenting. Um, my general thoughts are just lamenting that these fractures have appeared and that these people are going in different directions. And so it seems like the Mises Caucus came, the takeover happened, and at this point in time, it really just seems like nothing is really happening with that. And that, I think I've talked about this with Reed Coverdale on the air and done interviews about it, where it just seems that the messaging from the LP, the LP national account, has been good, but it hasn't been as, it's been a drastic improvement. And this isn't like a criticism or denouncing or anything, because I think that I met Reed Cooley in person at Childeberg, and he's one of my favorite people to talk to. We had like an incredible conversation. Um, but the messaging hasn't been as radical as LPNH. And in some ways that might be a good thing, maybe a bad thing. I don't know. I'm not the one who's doing it, and I'm not the greatest at messaging, so I leave that to other people. But I have my own thoughts about it, and it just seems more largely that the takeover has been kind of like a, okay, now what kind of thing. And I know there's great people that I have tremendous respect for who are, and this is just the beginning, so I don't mean to denounce anything, but this is just my feeling about how it's been. And in some ways there was a bit more hope for it, and it's kind of been a bummer, just personally, just kind of thinking that, well, there was years of excitement and working and hoping, for this thing to be achieved. And I think that if I were to have somebody like Angela McCardle on the show and talk about it, I think or Michael Heiss, who's great, both are great people I've met in person. I think they would say, yeah, everything, all the work was, now's when the real work starts, right? Is that we all this energy and effort had a singular goal, right, to take over the Libertarian Party. And now we achieved that, but we knew the whole time that it was going to be like this, that we were going to be putting all this effort in, achieving the goal of taking over the party, and then what, right? And then the real work starts, is what the answer is. But that real work isn't going to, once you take over the party, the progress isn't going to be an overnight kind of thing. It's a long plan. And so, in a way, that's kind of maybe my issue, or just the natural result of, okay, we had this huge movement that achieved our goal, and now there's nothing sexy to do except plan for the long haul, because people are, maybe people were expecting instant results that weren't necessarily going to come. But I know on the other side of the coin that there are real critiques to be made, of exactly what has happened. And like, I'm not immersed in that world, so I wouldn't necessarily come to me for real answers or real analysis or fair criticism even of what exactly is going on, because I'm not involved in that world. I'm not involved in the like LP politics or anything like that. But just as a fan of the movement, I'm just sharing my thoughts, and that's all I can do. So and again, this is, I'm not trying to call anybody out or anything like that. I just am talking about my own mental space and my feelings at this time about where everything is. And so even further along, it seems that things have fractured even more, to the point where now, and again, this might be my perspective is bad because of like the lack of longevity that I have, being in the movement only since 2016, not really knowing how things were during the 2000s or during the 90s. Like, there is a good case to be made that this is a libertarian golden age that we're living in right now, that right now there are more libertarians than there ever have been. There's more interest in the Mises Institute or other outlets for these ideas than there ever has been before. The Libertarian Institute, or antiwar.com, of course. But and I think that's a great thing. The internet has really made it what should be the most hopeful period of time for dissidents like us and dissident ideas. So, but it really just seems like um, maybe this is a reflection of the Twitter world too. Is that there is really just this toxic treatment and divisions of each other in a way that I haven't observed in much of the time I've been in this movement. Is that, whether it's the post libertarians just shitting on everyone who they used to be, because they've evolved to this higher plane and have seen the new gospel, and now libertarians are like normies, to where libertarians see normies as being normies, while post libertarians see libertarians as being normies, when in reality it really is just saying it's the same moralizing that libertarians do to normies, post libertarians do to libertarians. That it's not really an evolution, it's just a changing but staying the same, in the larger way. But on the flip side, there really seems to be this contempt for people. I mean, I'd say from my work and the work of my friends, for people who are engaging in the war of ideas, or the war of being anti-war, the war of being anti-war. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Um, but this constant thinking that, well, your strategy for achieving liberty isn't effective, and so therefore you're a lolbert, and what you're doing um isn't helpful, and it's a waste of time, and what you should be doing is earning money or raising a family or engaging in local politics or doing that kind of thing. Whereas, beforehand, maybe the same kind of sentiment was coming from the agorists who used to be, and who still are, but I don't have their ear, or they don't have my ear, moralizing about dropping out from the system, and participating in black markets and doing those things. I'm the kind of person where it's like, I do what I think is best, and I think everyone else should do what they think is best, right? Because that's kind of the division of labor. And I don't, and one of the reasons why I don't engage in the culture war either, and there seems to be a lot of people in the space, in this movement, who are engaging in the culture war and think that that's the most important thing. I don't think it's important personally, but if people want to do that, I'm not going to sit here and tell them that they're wasting their life or wasting their efforts. And I'm a big boy, I can take criticism, where people would think that what we're doing is a waste of time, that advocating about the war in Yemen is a waste of time because we're not going to change anything, and there's real things happening domestically affecting our lives that we should be focused on, and we're extorting people out of money, or swindling them out of money because we are trying to do something that, I don't know, is unrealistic, so therefore we're some kind of liars or something like that. And I think it's probably a small minority, but a vocal minority of people who are saying these things on Twitter, or who actually feel that way. But it really does, it doesn't hurt my feelings, but it pisses me off. Um, but it really makes me lament the fact that, like, it seemed at one point in time that we were all pulling the rope in the same direction. And I think that's what we should be doing, and not cutting each other down with with everyone else's chosen way of advocating liberty, right? And Ron Paul has always talked about, like, kids come to his events and ask him, well, what should I do? What should I do, Dr. Paul? I have these ideas now. And Ron says, well, what do you like to do? What are you good at? And I think that we all know we all are the best people to decide for ourselves what the best use of our time is. And I think that's very true. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone is using their time the best, or the most valuably, in the best application. But I really do think that, um if Mises Republicans want to go to, Mises Libertarians want to go to the Republican Party and work in the Republican Party, or work with the populist right, that's fine. I think they should do that. I think there needs to be people that think like us that are doing that. If people want to make alliances with the dissident left on single issue coalitions, they should do that. And if people want to go to the Libertarian Party and take it over and start the decentralized revolution, they should do that, and I applaud them. I think that's wonderful, and they should be doing that. So I guess it's really just asking the question in this episode, like, what the hell's going on? What is going on? And am I the only person who's noticing that this is happening? I don't know, but it seemed like at one point we were all friends, and now it seems like everyone hates each other. I hope I'm wrong about that, and please tell me if I am wrong, because the the Twitter space is a very small section of what my audience is. But I think, I if I wasn't sharing these thoughts with the podcast, because that's what I do with my show. Other people don't do that, but I've always tried to be very transparent and open and honest, and establish that rapport with my audience where I tell you what I'm thinking and what I'm struggling with and what worries me and all those things. I know maybe that's not the most professional way to have a show, but I think that building trust with the audience is very important. And you always know what you're getting with me. You're getting Patrick. You're not getting anything else, or any other influence, or I'm not going to try and be underhanded or anything like that. So now to go through a more, I've said my piece on that kind of stuff, but to go through with more of a concrete kind of thing, I think that I'm Team Libertarian Institute, right? My colleagues are some of my best friends, not just in the movement, but just in real life. That's not to say I don't have really good friends outside of the movement, but it's true. The institute, we're all a team. We don't always agree on everything, but I think that's great. But we all have kind of the same vision. Is that at the Libertarian Institute, we are giving libertarianism. Like, we are libertarian. It's the Libertarian Institute. And so we're trying to lead with the real shit, if that makes sense. It's like we're not Republicans, and we're not Republican light, and we're not Democrats either. We're not lefties either. We are libertarians. And I don't know if that's, I'm just thinking of like what post libertarians would say about, libertarianism or whatever, but it really is, thin libertarianism. And I've always been a thin libertarian, which means, I don't attach other values onto my libertarianism. It's, you believe in non-aggression, you believe in private property, and you're anti-war and you're anti-Fed. And you can bring with you social values, but they're not libertarian. That's separate, and that's to you. It's, your social values are not part of your libertarianism, basically. And I'm personally, I'm a right winger. I have conservative social values. On something, on most things, like, I believe in the nuclear family. I believe in that kind of decentralized unit. I believe in conservative social values, that you shouldn't, you should be modest, that you should not be promiscuous, that you should save your money, that you should work hard and do all those things. I'm not incredibly religious, but I do believe in God myself, or some kind of higher power. And I do think it's important that people have faith, and that they have some kind of faith, and that they share that with their family, and that they participate in the community. And I believe in living in rural areas, and knowing your neighbors, and those kind of things. But on the other hand, I have tattoos, and I like death metal, and um Oh yeah, I mean, I have guns. I do all these things. I go outdoors. I hunt. I do skin deer in my front yard. I have done that before, although I don't live close enough to any neighbors to where they would really complain about it. So that's kind of inside baseball. Welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. The best way to do that, guys, is to go to libertyweekly.club. Yes, I haven't changed the URL yet, but this is my membership website that also functions as a newsletter. So if you go to that website, libertyweekly.club, hit the subscribe button in the upper right-hand corner, and you can subscribe for the free newsletter, and I send out a lot of free content. However, there is a section in those free emails that is premium, and that premium section includes early access to my episodes, access to bonus episodes, and preprints of my articles before they're published at the Libertarian Institute or other outlets. So again, go to the website, hit subscribe in the top right hand corner, and sign up for that email list. You go through the page here and you can see all the content that I've set out in the past. There's a whole bunch of it, guys, and you get access to those previous emails that have gone out as well. Another way to help support me is to go to vitaldescent.com/stitchfix and sign up through my link there. You'll get $25 off your first order, and I will also get a $25 credit. Guys, I use this to buy my wardrobe. I'm a father of two. I have my own business. I do this, and I don't have time to go shopping. Can't haul the wife and kids around to have a leisurely shop for myself to pick these clothes. So what Stitch Fix does is that they pick the clothes for you. They send them to you in fixes, and it's really awesome stuff. These are all the pieces that I personally have bought myself. There's a lot of work stuff in there, but there's also casual stuff. I got an awesome plaid shirt that's in there, a flannel, really love that. I got this really cool sweatshirt. I got these awesome boots and a nice windbreaker, really good stuff. So go on over to vitaldescent.com/stitch fix. You can also get Vital Descent, really hard not to say Liberty Weekly, Vital Descent merchandise with the cool, awesome new logo from Mises Pieces. You can get all these kinds of things, all this merch. You got coffee cups, pint glasses, sweatshirts, premium t-shirts, premium sweatshirts, all that good stuff there at vitaldescent.com/merch. Also, guys, I started a TikTok channel, and I think that'll be really cool, trying to get more eyeballs on this content and more views. You can see it's already garnering a bunch of views, where I do anti-war cartoon reviews and a lot of cool stuff there. So vitaldescent.com/TikTok is where you can find me. My handle is at @PatMcFarland_, the same as my Twitter handle. Okay, guys, that's about it. Check out those things. Please help support this content. Help me pay my producer and make the show better for you guys. Thanks. But at the same time, I think that somebody like Kim Robinson at the Institute, who is someone who, is more socially progressive, more socially liberal. He's a libertarian, and his social views are valid. And there's a real paleo, not really even paleo kind of, there's a real reactionary strain in the movement that has really taken over in this. I've talked about it a lot on the podcast, this foregone conclusion that the right is the group that's most familiar, or that is most friendly to liberty. And while that may be true right now, it's not always true. And I think that this has a lot to do with the identification of libertarianism, like Rothbard identified libertarianism, and Raimondo did this too, is that we are the ancestors of the old right. And that's where our strain of libertarianism comes from the old right that formed in opposition to World War II. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I mean, being someone who's from the right, but I think that at this time we're in a weird place too, where there's all this stuff going on with transgenderism and drag queen story hour, and people taking their children to drag shows, and a lot of people really concerned with that, and quote unquote grooming in schools and things like that. And I think that being being someone who thinks, being an anti-war libertarian, because apparently that is another strain. And maybe it's a strain that has existed for a long time, but being someone who is most aligned with antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute, I of course I view foreign policy as being the most important issue. And right now, looking at the political scene, I see, and I'm not talking about politicians. That's very important to note. But looking at the political commentator scene and the activist scene, it is the left who has the most informed pundits, has the most activism. Like this Yemen war powers resolution, like Scott said, was 90% left wing groups and 9% libertarian groups and 1% Republican groups, right? But I'm talking about like commentators who are the most passionately anti-war, who are the most knowledgeable, and who have the largest followings is the left. It's the dissident left. It's not, the Democrats or anything like that. It's the dissident left. It's people like Jimmy Dore, or people like Caitlin Johnstone, or people like Aaron Matei, and Robbie Martin and Abby Martin. These people, they know their shit. They're passionate. They vehemently hate the the war state, and they have large audiences, and they like us. They like libertarians for the most part. There's other people like Ben Norton, who maybe, some of these people who are more like actual tankies might not like the libertarians as much, might not be willing to speak with us or work with us. Now, I don't know if like, I don't want to mischaracterize other people's views, but that's just the impression that I get. And I think that's fine, but there are people in that group that are more than willing to help, to work with us on this and are excited about it. Now, there are effective groups on the right too. BringOurTroopsHome.us, those guys, Dan McKnight, Hunter DeRensis, and I think Michael Bolden. I mean, of course, he's with the 10th Amendment Center, but I think he's more left wing though, so I don't want to put him in the right wing anti-war camp. But people like Pat Buchanan, and Lou Rockwell. But when I'm thinking, and maybe I could be corrected, but I can't think of people who are popular pundits and commentators who are anti-war on the right. And of course, there is the populist right. There is the populist right who are maybe some of the best foreign policy politicians out there. But it's always the bar is so low that it's like, we're praising Marjorie Taylor Greene for introducing these audit bills to audit all the weapons sales to Ukraine. And I think that's tremendous. And I applaud her for introducing those and for teaming up with people like Thomas Massie to introduce those and to give speeches. Like, she gave a speech at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where she said a lot of really awesome things. And in the past, I think I've been guilty of picking fights with her or criticizing her when it wasn't entirely productive to do so, instead of trying to convince her to be more like us. Instead, just blasting her and saying that, she really is trying to, because, I've talked about this before on the show, but the left wing is anti-Russia and the right wing is anti-China. And I criticized her for being anti-China in terms of trying to create a broad spectrum of I don't know, a broad spectrum in support of war with Russia and China, right? The right wing will sell half the country on hating China, and the left wing will sell the other half on hating Russia. And with that, inside of that, you have enough support to go to war with both, or at least to wage a cold war against both. Now, there are really valid criticisms and really valid and policy-based criticisms that I have of Marjorie Taylor Greene. but I'm glad that she is saying the things that she is and taking the action she is when it is right. And I think that my last piece talking about how Tsai Ing-wen and Zelensky are both welfare queens was really my effort to try to speak like the populist rights language about this. Um, Now, even though those the populist right might have some of the best politicians in terms of being anti-war, uh, they're not perfect, and there's a lot of things that they get wrong, and I'm not going to not point them out about foreign policy because that's the most important issue. Now, will I let other social things kind of go, right, and just not say anything about it? um there are other good things. Marjorie Taylor Greene, her declared antipathy for the alphabet soup organizations, I think that's very valuable, and I would applaud that. But there are other things, policy wise, that I don't like, that I'm not going to criticize or lambaste her for, because I just don't think they're as important as being anti-war. Now, there's been some things come across recently, where people just realized that Caitlin Johnstone is a tanky, right? Now, I like to use the word tanky to describe people. I've used it twice in this show. I don't know exactly what Caitlin identifies as. I know that she's a communist, or that she's a Marxist, or some strain of socialist in that respect. Now, have there been tweets that Caitlin has put out that I cringe at, that I really don't like? Yeah, sure. There has been, definitely. But I don't care. I don't really care, because Caitlin really is, and if you read Caitlin's work, you will know that she's one of, like, my favorite anti-war writers to read, or anti-imperialist writers to read. And I think that she brings a lot to the table. And moreover, she likes us, and she likes our work and promotes our work. And Ron Paul and Daniel McAdams like her, and she likes their work, and we cross promote and do things like that. And this has been an arrangement, I think, that's been in place since like 2017 or 2018. Um, Now, does Caitlin, she takes the gloves off too to fight with libertarians on certain issues. And I'm not saying that, like, first off, Caitlin is her own person, and she can defend herself, and she's a big girl. She can take criticism. She I'm not trying to white knight for her or do anything like that, and neither am I trying to grovel for her acceptance or support or anything like that. First off, because this is a pre-existing kind of relationship that has existed through these organizations, these arrangements that have existed for quite some time now. So it's really defending this pre-existing relationship, and people who are friendly towards each other on these issues and work together towards a mutual goal. Um, so I don't want to say that you can't criticize Caitlin for economic views or things like that. She certainly doesn't refrain from criticizing libertarians there, but I just don't really find it productive. And I would tell her, maybe the same thing about her critiques of libertarianism. Now, some people think it's like, I'm sure Caitlin would say that, and I've heard her say this, that capitalism itself is a necessity. Not only is it a necessity for the war state, but capitalism is what has brought that about. And so to get rid of the war state, you have to get rid of capitalism. And from the libertarian perspective, it's state power that is the cause of the war state. And in order to achieve the type of society that Caitlin would like to see, from our perspective, we would say that she would have to give the government, totalitarian powers, and that would only just result in a war state, right? So none of those things really get anywhere when we're discussing these, because, like, to be under the delusion that libertarians will ever see a society that they would like to see, um, like, full out, would be the same as believing that the society that Caitlin would like to see would ever be born out, or in even rather that the singular efforts of, me or Dave DeCamp or Scott Horton would ever bring about a libertarian society. On the flip side, the idea that Caitlin's singular efforts would ever usher in some kind of Marxist, communist state, or non-state, is just kind of delusional, and it's never going to happen. So, to me, just there's so much common ground with people like Caitlin, or people like, people like Robbie Martin, or Abby Martin, or Max Blumenthal. There's so much common ground there that we can work towards together, that I just don't understand. People, I saw Tom Woods and Gene Epstein going back and forth with Caitlin about rent. And I just, I don't see the point in that. With all due respect, I don't see the point in that, and I think it's a waste of time. And I think it's it's risking the souring of a relationship that doesn't need to be risked. A relationship that is very fruitful and productive, that doesn't need to be risked when you do things like this. Now, on the other hand, too, there was a Twitter thread that was brought to my attention between Justin Raimondo and Caitlin. And this was in some of the last months of Justin's life, where Justin, unprovoked, attacked Caitlin and criticized her work. Sorry. And Caitlin responded with, her own type of invective. And it was something that was very hurtful, especially to a man who was dying at the time. Now, people have their own personalities, and I'm not perfect. In some way, Caitlin might have been justified in defending herself, but maybe not saying exactly what she did. And Justin was not justified in unprovokedly criticizing Caitlin. As far as I know, it was unprovoked. We're all human beings. We all have strong personalities, especially, writers, who, someone like, Caitlin Johnstone and Justin Raimondo have two of the strongest personalities that come across in their writing that I've read, and I enjoy both of them. Of course, I'm the Raimondo fellow, so I model a lot of ways, model my writing after Justin's writing, but I really enjoy that personality. And that's the reason why I'm so open and honest on my show here about how I'm feeling and who I am and that kind of stuff, because I think the personality is really what makes things unique. So going through that, there's lessons to be learned from the past, from the characters and figures of the past, and studying, especially for me, studying Justin's career and seeing choices that were made and broadsides that were fired, and learning from those and trying to be the most effective that I can be going forward and the most persuasive. I think there are lessons to be learned from who you pick your battles with and who you align with on certain issues, and who you claim a truce with about other issues that you disagree. Now, for me, all gloves are off for the most part on the war and peace issue. Like, one thing that Justin did is, I think I've talked about this on the show, but Pat Buchanan had a piece decrying the war in Kosovo and the NATO bombing campaign in Kosovo. Now, at the end of the piece, he said we should be bombing China. Sorry. We should be bombing China instead. And someone wrote, and that was published on antiwar.com. And someone wrote into the newspaper, to Antiwar, and wrote to Justin and said, this doesn't belong on antiwar.com. Why would you ever publish this? Pat Buchanan says we should be bombing China instead of Kosovo. That's insane. Now, Justin was one of Pat's biggest supporters. He supported Pat Buchanan's 4 presidential campaigns and was the keynote speaker at the announcement ceremony for the last campaign. And I think Justin's words were, it's Buchanan or barbarism, which I think is awesome. So, but in a response piece, Justin said, well, Pat Buchanan is a hero, and he, he's absolutely right about Kosovo and all that. At the same time, he's incredibly crazy about bombing China, and some of his leaps of logic just, uh, or oversights in logic just, they astound me. But at the same time, what antiwar.com is about is finding this common strain among ideologies. And that's what I wanted to point out too, is that this is aligning with people like Caitlin on the anti-war issue, and focusing our coverage and our activism just on foreign policy and the national security state. That is how we are the most effective, by creating this broad issue coalition and putting anti-war and libertarianism at the tip of the spear, and making it the tip of the spear for these efforts has always been what Eric's vision for antiwar.com was, and Justin's vision for what antiwar.com was. So aligning with Caitlin on this issue, and if I should have addressed this when I first started talking about it, but Caitlin, for those of you who don't know, Caitlin Johnstone she's an Australian. I don't know exactly how she fancies herself. I think, she's a writer. She writes about foreign policy primarily. She also writes about, Marxism and her communism, but it's primarily is about foreign policy and anti-imperialism. And she also does certain things, like she'll write poetry and she'll write lyrics, and as a part of her articles. And so there's also a very personal touch there. And she has a Substack, which I'll link to in the show notes page, vitaldissent.com/241. And her work has been printed on antiwar.com. It's been printed on the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Sorry. And so go check out her work. I think that she's, people like Jimmy Dore are familiar with her. You might see her on, she has a very recognizable Twitter profile picture. So I wanted to play a few clips here from my interview with Eric Garris, talking about exactly what antiwar.com is about. So here we go. This is from episode 229 of the podcast. libertyweekly.net/229 or vitaldissent.com/229.
And it was interesting as well, because there was a big split in the conservative movement over support for the war. And so we were able at that point to really present a left, right, middle perspective against the war. You'd go to our site and we would have an article by Daniel Ellsberg and another article by Pat Buchanan, side by side. This was something that would have been unheard of, but we've continued to do that to this day. And it was...
Okay, so that's the first clip, Eric talking about how they would be the only site that would have someone like Daniel Ellsberg and Pat Buchanan published together side by side, which is really something. People of two totally different political persuasions.
I should say in 2000, we had during 2000, we had two national conferences which were held in the San Francisco Bay Area. And at the second one, Pat Buchanan was our keynote speaker. And it was interesting because that particular conference had a real amalgam of left and right, because we had Pat Buchanan and we had Norman Solomon, we had Kathy Kelly, we had other conservatives. I can't remember who all of them were. Some people from Chronicles magazine. We had a real good selection of the cross left and right, and it really showed us that this was something that could work, that we could bring together people from all over the political spectrum to join on these issues, as long as we focused entirely on foreign policy and the national security state.
Okay, so I think what's most important about what Eric said there was that, or taking it a step further, is that to really truly end the warfare state, or to truly end the all these wars and the, the imperialist state of the United States, it's going to take more than just libertarians, and it's going to take more than just a movement on the right. It's going to take a broad coalition. And Dave Smith has talked about this a lot, about the danger of Occupy Wall Street, where you had the Tea Party movement and you had the Occupy movement side by side, and they didn't agree on everything, but they had their guns pointed at the right direction. And of course, that couldn't be. And so, Dave's theory, and I tend to agree with this, is Dave's theory is that there was some kind of COINTELPRO or some kind of operation that focused primarily on identity politics to smash those into little bits, smash these movements into little bits, or at least to divide them and put them on two different sides of the culture war. The importance of this mission of making an anti-war coalition from the left to the right and everything in between, I think, I mean, it won't be achieved by blasting people like Caitlin Johnstone because she's a communist, right? It's not going to happen. And to have the hubris of believing that libertarians are the biggest group in this anti-war coalition, um, just doesn't really hold water, right? Now we can try to punch way above our weight by having outlets like antiwar.com be an indispensable part of the anti-war movement. Um, but I just don't believe that we would be effective in any large way without having a broad spectrum alliance. Um, Now, some have said that it appears, and I don't want to give this impression because I have criticized the right more so, but the reason why I have done that is because this libertarian movement to the right, um, that the larger movement seems to really have been pushed in this reactionary right direction, and I don't agree with that. I do think that libertarians are we are our own thing. It's not that we have to align with one or the other. Now, is the right better right now? Largely, yes. And I already said things about how these populist right politicians are some of the best on certain anti-war issues. Um, I wish they hated China less, or they were less hawkish on China. Now, some people would say that populist right figures, um, they don't want to go to war with China or advocate war with China. They just want to have great power competition with China and confront China and fight them economically. I don't think there is a difference, but I think it's a distinction without a difference, really. At the end of the day, greasing the skids in one direction is more so adds to that effort. But I think they can be reached, and I think that in our outreach and in our influence spheres, trying to push them more in a libertarian direction, uh, while also realizing that they're not us and we are not them, I think is useful, and I wouldn't condemn anyone for thinking that. But I would like to see, more outspoken efforts to push them in more of a libertarian anti-war direction. And that's one thing that I haven't identified so much, is that the people who are working with, who advocate for the populist right as being anti-war, it'd be nicer to have their voices be louder and say, um, be more influential in that sphere instead of just yes manning it all the time and cheerleading the rise, while not also being like Justin Raimondo and criticizing Pat Buchanan while also heaping praise upon him. Um, and of course, that can be done a bit more persuasively too. So that's my sole real critique of that. Um, But this is, this episode is about 52 minutes long for now. I think I said most of my piece. I guess just to really conclude is that it'd be nice if we just had a truce and let people do what they think is best for liberty, instead of doing all this infighting, where we're criticizing people for not wanting to participate in the culture war, or laughing at people for trying to push the Yemen war powers resolution, or just being assholes. And maybe that's just a Twitter thing, I don't know, but stop being an asshole. um I'm not exempt from that. I'm a human and I'm imperfect. But it would be nice if we all were pulling the rope in the same direction, instead of wasting time uh, fighting and criticizing other people's chosen way of activism. So, well, anyways, I'll probably talk about this more, but I wanted to do an episode on this because what I really wanted to do was do an episode on Kosovo, because Kosovo is in the news again. But the history of that conflict is so incredibly deep, and I'm such a perfectionist to the point where if I tried to get everything perfect, there wouldn't be any show, and there hasn't been much of any show in the last month because of that. In partly, but also partly because of what I just spent the episode talking about. So I just wanted to jump on and do a stream of consciousness about some of the thoughts that have been stewing inside my head. So, well, tell me what you think in the comments. And I'll read the comments and maybe I'll do something with those comments. But I really appreciate all you guys listening to my new show, Vital Descent. I'm working on putting content out more regularly, but everything's been so crazy in the last month or so. And for those of you who think I'm, wasting my time writing about war and peace, maybe it will make you happy to know that I've, been really busy with my law practice, actually helping people in the real world, fighting the state, and trying to keep people with their kids, man. So, all right. vitaldescent.com/241. Libertarian Institute is having their fundraiser for their winter fundraiser. So head on over to libertarianinstitute.org/donate. You can see 501c3. You can write it off on your taxes. You could also see all the awesome kickbacks that you get there, including a limited print Libertarian Institute t-shirt. So, all right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you. And let's just all try to get along. All right. Peace.